As president of the American Bar Association, I am asked all the time about what my favorite part of the job is. And it's hard to pinpoint a single thing, but I think my favorite response is to note my complete pride and joy in witnessing principled lawyers who work diligently to improve our profession, our justice system, and our country. I am proud to be part of a profession that stands up for equal justice for all, protects judicial independence, and fights for a vibrant, diverse legal profession around the world and at home. I've been privileged to see volunteers and staff helping asylum seekers at the border and assisting victims of natural disasters around the country. Been humbled to witness the lengths lawyers have gone to help their colleagues suffering from addiction, depression, and other forms of mental illness. I was especially proud when the American Bar Association and state and local bar associations spoke out in defense of a free press for Law Day, and when the ABA teamed with the Clooney Foundation for Justice to create Trial Watch to monitor and shine a light on trials around the world where human rights violations are a concern. I believe we are seeing a renaissance of appreciation for justice and the role lawyers play to preserve our liberties. And I am grateful that the American Bar Association is reinvigorating itself as a membership organization that educates, that connects, and that inspires all lawyers. We stand for our principles, and because of the ABA, we do not stand alone. It is now my honor to introduce the recipient of the 2019 ABA Medal. The ABA Medal is the highest award presented by our association. It is given only in years when our Board of Governors determines a nominee has provided exceptional and distinguished service to the law and the legal profession. Today's recipient, Dale Minami, joins legendary justices of the United States Supreme Court, including Oliver Wendell Holmes, Felix Frankfurter, Thurgood Marshall, William J. Brennan Jr., Sandra Day O'Connor, Anthony Kennedy, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Other recipients have included Watergate Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski, human rights activist Father Robert Drinan, and other prominent attorneys. Dale Minami has devoted a lifetime to breaking down stereotypes and advocating for Asian Pacific Americans. His work in overturning the Supreme Court's Korematsu decision is legal legend, but it is just one of many instances in his career where he has fought for the protection of the rights of people who have faced discrimination. His determination and commitment to the rule of law has resulted in countless people receiving justice. Mr. Minami was key in obtaining judicial recognition that the evacuation and incarceration of more than 100,000 Japanese Americans during World War II was unjust and illegal. Although the Supreme Court in 1944 upheld the constitutionality of the internment in Korematsu versus United States, Minami and his team successfully challenged that ruling 40 years later. In 2017, Minami, representing the adult children of Fred Korematsu, filed an amicus brief in the United States Supreme Court to review the government's travel ban, which resulted in the court's explicit repudiation of the 1944 Korematsu decision in its review of Trump versus Hawaii. Minami's dedication to civil rights extends far beyond the Korematsu victory. Early in his career, he served as lead counsel in numerous landmark cases, involving the rights of Asian Pacific Americans. Chan versus Scott, a class action lawsuit against the San Francisco Police Department to enjoin the unconstitutional arrests and detention of young Asian Americans. United Filipinos for Affirmative Action versus California Blue Shield, the first class action employment lawsuit brought by Asian Pacific Americans on behalf of Asian Pacific Americans. Spokane JACL versus Washington State University, a class action on behalf of Asian Pacific Americans to establish an Asian American Studies program at Washington State University. And Nakanishi versus UCLA, a successful claim for unfair denial of tenure after several hearings and widespread publicity over discrimination in academia. Mr. Minami worked with others in the Asian community to form some of the organizations that are still powerhouses for Asian civil rights. He was a co-founder of the Asian Law Caucus, the first community interest law firm serving Asian Pacific Americans in this country, a co-founder of the Asian American Bar Association of the Greater Bay Area, the first Asian American Bar Association in the United States, an original incorporator of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Asian Pacific Bar of California, and the Coalition of Asian Pacific Americans, one of the nation's first political action committees focused on Asian American candidates and issues. Mr. Minami has also been involved in the judicial appointment process and in establishing or influencing public policy and legislation. President Bill Clinton appointed him as chair of the Civil Liberties Public Education Fund in 1996. He has served as a member of the four California Fair Employment and Housing Commission and has chaired the California Attorney General's Asian Pacific Advisory Committee, advising the state's Attorney General on key issues. He has also served as a commissioner on the State Bar's Commission on Judicial Nominees Evaluation and on Senator Barbara Boxer's Judicial Screening Committee, which made recommendations for federal judicial appointments. Mr. Minami received a BA in Political Science from the University of Southern California and his JD from University of California, Berkeley Bolt Hall School of Law. It is my honor and my privilege, on behalf of the American Bar Association, to present the 2019 ABA Medal to Dale Minami.
President Carlson, thank you for that wonderfully kind introduction. Very much appreciated. It's so nice to be here to see so many friends, longtime friends, delegates of the ABA, and so many colleagues. And I'm especially happy to be here today to see members of my family, including my wife, Ai Mori, who's an attorney with the California First District Court of Appeal, my two daughters, Lena and Ellie, not in that order of age. And all this family have taught me so much about profound love and also great patience as well. So I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to thank, of course, the ABA, the Board of Governors, and friends of mine on that board, including Judge Eileen Cato, Michelle Wong-Krause. And as well, I'd like to thank Bob Carlson, the president, not just for his presidency, but his leadership. I didn't understand what this award was about at first. And when I got a call from President Carlson, I had never received a call from an ABA president. I thought somehow I messed up my continuing education requirement. But when he talked to me and he explained that this was an award, I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. But I didn't understand the significance. I didn't grasp it until I saw the list of former awardees. And that list is just a veritable list of giants in American jurisprudence. And I also found out later, as I went through the next weeks, what the significance was as friends and family and colleagues congratulated me. And I realized this is not a list, or excuse me, an award an individual award. This is a list that recognizes an entire Asian Pacific American community, and that's the significance of this award. Because we've been very invisible bystanders in the American consciousness. The race issues are black and white, and rarely do Asian Americans get noted, although Latinos now do get recognized. So this type of recognition is very, very important for us. So we're not invisible anymore. As you could look around, we are certainly not invisible. My grandparents immigrated from the southern Japan in the 1900s. They came here like a lot of immigrants, seeking a better life, seeking opportunities for their children. But they faced a wall of laws denying them the chance to be citizens, denying them from certain occupations. They couldn't own land, they couldn't intermarry. And they came at a time just after the first Exclusion Act against an ethnic minority, which was the Chinese Americans, was enacted in 1882. And they came just before the second immigration ban occurred against Asians and Japanese in 1924. My parents were born here. They're second generation. They're called Nisei, and they were thoroughly Americanized. They were on their path to the American dream until World War II happened. And it was really, their lives were crudely interrupted by the incarceration of 120,000 of Japanese Americans, which included our family, our friend, my then one-year-old brother, whom I forgot to mention earlier, who is here today, and I'm talking about him later, though. But they were then sent to these nether reaches of this country. But before they went, they had to live in the filthy horse stalls of Santa Anita Racetrack. And it was the only time I saw my mother cry when she recounted that terrible experience of having to live under those conditions. They were transported then across the country to the swamplands of Rohr, Arkansas, where they lived with indefinite confinement in dismal conditions as well. But I think the greatest damage was the humiliation and the degrading of their citizenship, just like one of the greatest deprivations was their loss of citizenship. The Japanese Americans, 2/3 of them were American citizens. They were denied any due process rights. They did not have a right to an attorney. They did not have a right to trial. They did not have the right to notice of their charges. And so they were sent without any of these constitutional liberties, even though most of them were citizens. Their crime was racial ancestry. The justification was military necessity. They returned home to Los Angeles to rebuild their shattered lives, and they were deeply, deeply shamed. They never talked about these experiences to their children. My father became a gardener. It was the only job he could get at the time. I was born at a Japanese hospital, and they called it that in East Los Angeles because only Japanese is the only hospital that admitted Japanese doctors. And we lived in a garage for 8 months with another family because we couldn't get into our home. I was the third of 3 boys, and the older son, Dr. Roland Minami, became a dentist. Then he became a doctor, and we were very happy when he finished his education. But he was one of the kindest persons I've ever known, and he taught me how to think. He taught me how to be curious about so many things. My second brother, Neil, became a coach and a teacher, and he kicked my butt regularly, although a lot of people thought I deserved it. I'm not sure about that. But each dutifully got married, dutifully had 2 children, a boy and a girl. But the third son was not quite so dutiful. He broke things, he argued with everybody, he ran away a lot, usually just around the corner. But with the advantage of maturity, hindsight, and introspection, I realized that those minor acts of rebellion were not my fault. I was predisposed genetically and environmentally to act that way. But that rebelliousness may be the source of my interest in the civil rights movements, the movement in the 50s that I used to see on TV. And I saw these water cannons aimed at African-American demonstrators. I saw dogs sicked on these peaceful protesters who were simply trying to get a bite to eat. And that same type of imagery brought to mind the 1965 Watts riots. They call it South Central now, but in 1965, it seemed like half of LA was burning down out of black rage for protesting inequality. And those events, those images made a huge impression on me, and I carry those with me today. I guess being a little bit insubordinate or rebellious, I chose the most rebellious law school I could find. So I decided to go to UC Berkeley. And virtually the same, when I walked on campus, another rebellion occurred. It was the Third World Strike that is being celebrated this year as an anniversary. And it was a movement by students at San Francisco State that went to Berkeley, then went across the country to challenge the non-white narrative of people of color being bystanders, supernumeraries in the entire history of this country. And that made a great impression on me because it was led by African Americans, Latinx, and Native Americans, and to them we owe a great debt as all Americans because they helped us move forward in the entire civil rights movement to learn about ourselves. To be inspired like I was to demand equal rights, to stand up and speak out against injustice. And while I was in law school, I read Korematsu versus the United States, Hirabayashi versus the United States, and Yasui, the United States versus the United States. Three men who challenged the military order, singling out Japanese Americans. I thought those decisions were just terrible decisions. And I think the problem the Supreme Court had with those decisions in 1943 and 44 during the time of World War II was there's simply no evidence, concrete evidence, to support the theory of the government that Japanese Americans were disloyal and dangerous. In fact, there was so little evidence, no expert witness testimony, no testimony in the record, no act of espionage or sabotage ever occurred that caused an arrest of a Japanese American. So the government had to concoct a very flimsy theory about the justification. And that theory was because of their peculiar ethnic characteristics of Japanese Americans that predisposed them to disloyalty and therefore made them dangerous. And the court, in one of the greatest failures, abdicated its responsibility as an independent inquirer of the evidence, upheld the military orders, and failed to exercise its duty, I feel, to investigate, and they ceded complete deference to the president. After law school, I helped start the Asian Law Caucus, which still exists today, and our mission was to empower the Asian Pacific American community to use the law as a sword and a shield to do so. It was a nonprofit community interest law firm. And from that nonprofit law firm, we opened a nonprofit private practice. We did not intend to do that, of course. But we tried to balance doing good and doing well. Unfortunately or fortunately, we did a lot more good than we did well. But we survived for 44 years. And we survived with the same kind of values and dedication to social justice, and in large part because I had such wonderful partners. The early ones, Don Tamaki and Minette Kwok, are here today. The newer partners, Mark Fong, Sean Tamura Sato, Olivia Lee, our associates are here, along with our administrators, Gail Lang, who's amazing, and Sheila Naratam, who's been with us a long time. They have held together that culture for all these years, and for them, I'm very grateful. In 1982, Korematsu came back to us, the case and the man. A professor and a lawyer discovered evidence that the government had altered, suppressed, and destroyed critical evidence in the Hirabayashi, Korematsu, and Yasui cases, which contradicted the government's claim of disloyalty and danger. And he called me up and said, I'd like to reopen these cases. And I thought, well, are these guys still alive? And of course, he said they were. I found them in a phone book, which I had to explain earlier in another panel what a phone book was to some of these folks. And he's here today. The person who found that evidence became part of our legal team, Peter Irons. And many of the other members of that remarkable team who are here today, I'd like to just name, Robert Ruskey, Karen Kai, Professor Lorraine Bonai, Don Tamaki, Peter Irons was here as well, Dennis Hayashi, and from Seattle, Rod Kawakami, who became the lead counsel for Gordon Hirabayashi. They are here today, too. So we arranged a meeting with Fred Korematsu, a famous name on a famous case, and we thought we were very intimidated, and it's daunting to, that we're going to meet Fred Korematsu. It's like meeting Penoyer or Neff, and coming in here and you think, whoa, I remember that case, the first one I ever read in civil procedure, 1880-something it was, I guess. But we brought these cases at a historical moment in time. It was a time when Japanese Americans were lobbying Congress for redress and reparations, $20,000 and an apology for what they felt was the illegal treatment. But they needed a judicial declaration because this group, which was led by Japanese Americans, but joined by persons of all colors, a Rainbow Coalition, did not have a judicial declaration to counter the opponents of redress in Congress, which said that, well, the Supreme Court decided these cases in 43 and 44, so what else can you say about it? Well, we could say that those decisions were based on fraud, and so we needed a judicial declaration to that effect. And in November 1983, we got that declaration from Judge Marilyn Hall Patel, where she ruled that there was serious misconduct which infected those decisions, that there was manipulation of the evidence, and that racism most likely infected those military orders. And with those findings, she overturned Fred Korematsu's 40-year-old conviction. Minoru Yasui and Gordon Hirabayashi had their convictions overturned as well, but Gordon had to go to the Ninth Circuit to get his relief. And in 1988, exactly 21 years to this date, August 10, President Reagan signed the bill that granted Japanese Americans redress, the $20,000 and an apology. We thought our work was done. Then the Gulf War happened. Then September 11th. And we saw the demonization of another marginalized minority group, Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. It was an echo of history. And we saw these striking similarities that made us feel that we needed to speak out. We saw religious profiling, hate crimes, slurs, stereotypes. We saw the calls for mass incarceration of this disempowered group, and then finally the call for an immigration ban. So we reassembled our legal teams, and we started a campaign called Stop Repeating History to remind this country about the terrible mistake it made when it incarcerated Japanese Americans, when it did an immigration ban for Chinese. And we felt that we needed to inform the court, the public and the courts, that this kind of things should not happen again. We, as Asian Pacific American, had been there before. So it was kind of a project that we felt that we absolutely had to do as Americans. But then the Supreme Court decides Trump versus Hawaii and upholds the immigration ban. It repeats history, and it ignores the blatant racist comments made underlying those immigration bans. It ignores and fails to explore any kind of concrete justification for this, and instead it makes the same mistake that Korematsu was made, and that is the complete deference to the President of the United States. And while it nominally, ostensibly overruled Korematsu, it, as Justice Sotomayor says, redeploys the same poor logic and comes to the same result with the same damaging precedent of utter deference to the Supreme Court. We live in precarious times. The rule of law is under attack. Racism and white supremacy are being normalized. The barbarism at the border begs for a humane response. We see the disparagement of our judicial system. We see attacks against a free press, attacks against our electoral system, and these anti-immigration dog whistles. And I believe this is where the ABA comes in, because it is a powerful, strong organization devoted to the rule of law. It can speak out, as it has been doing, and I'm very proud of Bob Carlson's statement about the barbarism at this border. And it has been speaking out and will continue. I hope it continues to speak out, because it has the power to affect the change that we need to, at least changing attitudes. And it has the power to help us move forward on social justice issues, just as it did when it supported Japanese American redress years ago. My grandparents suffered discrimination. My parents were put in prisons, but they never lost faith in this country. And neither did I, or do I, because I keep this faith with the understanding that I have the right to exercise my political birthright to dissent, just like Gordon, Min, and Fred did years ago, so that I will never accept that racist command to go back to your own country, because I come from here. I belong here. We helped build this country, and despite the discrimination, despite this racism, we believe in this country, and we are not going anywhere. Thank you very much.